on the Tech Factor podcast with Purple Quarter. Today in the house we have Satya. Satya, so thank you so much for joining us in the office.
My pleasure.
I know you've come from Chennai and you have a packed day, so thank you so much for coming in and doing this with us.
Yeah.
So, Satya, we were discussing this offline as well, right? So you've done your IIT Madras, the aerospace engineering, and then you did your PhD in aerospace from Georgia Institute of Technology and moved back to India. Right, I'm going to get everyone's attention that you've got 6 startups that you run. Of course, there are other co-founders you mentioned run other startups. But how did you get into this entire space of incubating where you started your education? How did you get into the whole space?
Yeah, it's been a journey. So started with doing engineering, then doing PhD, you get into research, then you become an academic, and there is more research that you do. You can keep on doing this, and
Sure.
then the question at some point is that where is this research taking you and taking the rest of the world with? And so you have to ask the question: you're developing technologies, you're doing some science that has to actually lead to developing some technologies, but unless the technology actually sees the light of day in a product that actually goes in is sold in the market, we are not creating the impact. And so the question is it possible for us to actually walk that extra mile in converting a science to a technology to a product, and a product that fits the market and go to the market with it? So this is the process. So unless we actually do these things ourselves, we will not know why we are actually even doing the research.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
that's what it is.
Oh, interesting. So if you were to tell me you started off pretty young in terms of making sure that, you incubated startups in IIT Madras, and I'm sure you're still doing that as we speak. Your latest one is also incubated in IIT Madras. Could you tell us your journey of looking at 6 different startups? Of course, I'm assuming they're around propulsion and combustion.
Yeah, aerospace, you would say.
Aerospace, right?
Yeah,
So if
yeah.
you can talk about your journey through why these 6,
Yeah.
how do you pick them?
Right. So you always pick to do a startup only if it has a market potential.
Correct.
That's the starting point.
Sure.
Then are a bunch of fits that you have to look at, right? So the leading edge of the whole thing is what's called the product market fit. So if you're thinking about a particular product, it has to have solve a problem. It has to be addressing a pain point of customers. What is the customer segment like, and what is the kind of market size that customer segments represent? All of those things actually indicate the product market fit.
Right.
But what is the tech that you're actually going to pack into that product that delivers the specifications, the features that the product has that fits the market? Calls for in the background, you need to have like a technology product fit. All technologies don't get into products that have a market and so on.
Right.
And then you ask the question, what's the person technology fit? So this is the technology that you need to do. Am I the right guy to do this?
Interesting.
Right. So you go through this line of argument to find out, okay, are all these things aligning, coming backwards from the market? Am I the right guy to do this? Okay, if I'm ticking all these boxes, yeah, I'm there.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so those are the filters. So there are people who actually walk up to me and talk about ideas almost on a weekly basis. It's not like I actually jump on each of those.
Right.
Yeah.
Has it been hard getting, interest from investors, because Deeptech is still really nascent in India?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard sell. Yeah,
It's a hard sell.
Right, yeah.
But there is a use case, and we just spoke about the product market fit. So why is it a hard sell?
Oh, because of the gestation periods. It takes longer to get to the market.
It's more research and
Yeah, so people are not sure if you will actually, there are a lot of things, right? So they want to make sure that the founder actually will last that long.
Oops, okay.
Being very candid here.
Right.
So if I were an investor, that will be something that's on top of my mind. This guy is going to say that, I'll take 5 years to get to market. I mean, first of all, the founder will not say it's going to take 5 years. So
Right.
that's something that the investor is actually dialing in his own head.
Correct.
Right. So the founder says 2 years, the investor hears 5 years.
Right. I'm sure.
So these are the problems.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Eplane.
Yeah.
Right. I'm quite curious about what you guys have put together.
Yeah.
I happened to bump into your site. I looked at your website, and it's beautifully described in terms of minutes. it's going to take
Yeah, of
if
course.
one were to use an E-plane versus,
Yeah.
using other modes of transport.
Yeah.
Could you first of all talk about how did you come upon this, and then what is the tech behind it, and how is it going to reduce to 14 minutes versus other modes of transport?
Sure. I mean, so flying obviously is a lot faster when compared to going on the road, and uh, the next thing about the road is the traffic. So roads have this problem that you have to actually go straight and then take a right and then another left and all that stuff, and you're not exactly going as the crow flies, which first of all flying would do, and second, it does actually at a much higher speed than what you will go on the road with. And then you have traffic that slows you down further, right? So all these factors add up to the hours of travel that we have to do,
Sure.
which is eliminated when you now try to fly. And when you now start saying, hey, what about traffic in the sky, right? So we then say, hey, there are like lots of layers of the sky that we can actually use, and it's not just only one particular level at which we will be, traveling, and that eases up the traffic over there.
Sure.
At a point where we imagine that there's going to be a lot of traffic. Because that's a question that a lot of people immediately ask, right? So they start imagining that everybody is now going to actually get in the sky, right?
Correct. True.
Right? And then you have to start thinking, okay, if all of them are actually on a flat surface and then they are going up to different levels, you actually have a lot more space out there. So for a lot of these reasons, flying is actually an obvious choice for decreasing the amount of time that it takes for you to get from one place to the other. But then the question is, what is the cost? So that's where electric aviation comes into picture. So if you make electric planes, your asset cost in the first place is going to be lower than a corresponding combustion engine-based flight. Second is maintenance, and third is the operating cost. So all three costs that you would incur are actually brought down. So you could potentially be running this at about half or 1/3 of what the cost would be, and that disrupts the market significantly.
Sure.
The next problem that you have to ask is, okay, where am I going to take off and land? Right, because if I just talk about electric aviation, it could be normal planes that are taking off from runways. And the problem currently we have with electric aviation is that we don't have the kind of range that we would like.
Okay.
So we don't have airstrips that are actually as close to each other as we would like. So recently, just last Friday, I was actually scoping around Punjab, for example, right? So Punjab is a small state, and they have at least about 12 airstrips, and each of these is within about 30 kilometers of each other. That's a great place for us to actually do conventional takeoff electric aviation, as a matter of fact.
Right.
But you'll still require people to come to the airport, come to the airstrip, and so on. So it becomes like a three-legged journey. So we try to decrease these problems by saying, is it possible for us to actually take off from where you are and land where you want to be? And that would be possible only if you do like a vertical takeoff and landing. Vertical takeoff and landing guzzles a lot more power because you're trying to beat gravity every time you're taking off and landing, without taking the help of the wings, which would otherwise do if you're going on a conventional runway takeoff. So that guzzling power for vertical takeoff and landing reduces the amount of range that you will still have, right? So all of these things put together makes it the best suited for something like an urban air mobility, because the typical distances that you travel while you're crawling on the streets is about 10 to 20 kilometers. That's why you're actually getting stuck for about an extended period of time, like an hour or hour and a half.
Right.
If I can actually cut that down to about 10 minutes, there's like a huge value proposition.
Sure. So since we are on the subject of electric e-planes, right? So we do see a lot of attention around electric vehicles that's getting everybody's sight, and we're talking about batteries around it and so on and so forth. Why is the adoption for e-plane not as much as an electric vehicle? Because if I see two use cases, the one that you actually spoke about, the turning left and right and being in traffic will exist whether you're in a normal vehicle or a e-vehicle, right? Whereas when you look at an e-plane, we're actually looking at solving some of those.
Yeah.
But I still don't see adoption. So what are the pain points there? Is there like regulated?
Just wait for me to make the plane and you will see it adopted.
Do you see other people adopting to it as well?
There's a lot of development around the world.
Okay.
And we are at the cusp of getting all these things out within the next couple of years.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's where the situation is. So yeah, it's a matter of time to adopt, and everything takes its time because making a plane is obviously more expensive than making a car.
Correct.
So people always try to do what they can rather than what they need to, right? So if everybody could actually make a plane, then it would be a great place. But you probably wouldn't be interviewing me today. Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. But you did mention about the cost, right? That kind of perks my attention. So
Yeah.
you said this would be actually lesser cost.
Yeah.
What are you comparing? What are the comparables here?
Obviously, like a helicopter.
Like an helicopter.
So what is the closest comparison to electric? So I'm doing two comparisons, as a matter of fact. So one is what's the cost of an electric car versus a combustion IC engine car? Just looking at whether it's greater or less. That's all, right? We don't have to actually look at the exact numbers. Versus what is the cost of an electric plane compared with its corresponding combustion counterpart, right? For doing the same job. It so happens that in the in cars, right, electric cars have the problem that they have to sort of mentally compete with the IC engine cars in terms of range in a single fuel tank capacity versus a single charge capacity of the battery.
Sure.
And they don't have a weight limitation. So you look at the typical electric car that's actually super heavy when compared to a IC engine car, because they just pack a lot of battery on the floor to get to a range that is comparable to what a car would give in a single fuel tank in order to avoid what's called as a range anxiety, right? Or at least minimize the range anxiety. If you try to do the same thing with the plane will actually become super heavy and we will not be able to fly.
Correct.
So the sense that we always do is let's keep the weight the same, right? Between the combustion thing and this.
Okay.
And let's say I remove the fuel tank, I remove the engine, and I put the batteries and motors, right? I'll find that the range actually gets drastically less.
Sure.
Right? Because I have to have the weight the same in order to be able to fly. But the question then is, what can I do with this range? So it turns out in the case of planes, the range that a full fuel tank can offer is rarely utilized.
Okay.
That's the thing that nobody actually thinks about. Right, a four-seater Cessna, for example, has a range of about 1,600 kilometers. I don't really see a Cessna flying for 1,600 kilometers every time. Right, probably it does about 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers. So why are we actually, busting our butts against something like that? We don't have to actually compare at all. We just find a different use case where the short range can be utilized.
Sure.
So batteries then are actually the largest cost component in both the cars as well as planes, and which is the reason why electric cars are actually more expensive when compared to IC engine cars.
Correct.
Whereas here we have a limitation on how much battery you can pack. That brings down the cost of the plane right away.
Okay.
That's
Interesting.
it.
Interesting. So if I were to ask you, technically, how long does it take to put an E-plane together?
If I were to do a conventional takeoff electric aircraft, it would not take a long time. It can be done in a couple of years.
Couple of years.
Yeah.
But if it's in
eVTOL is a little bit of a pain. Yeah. So you have to figure out a lot more things.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. As in you have to. I mean, we particularly at Eplane, we really wrap our heads around how to combine the VTOL and the fixed wing that we otherwise would have for like a forward flight as a plane, and make the plane very compact and also try to extend the range and so on. So we have a certain tech that we allow for the vertical rotors to enhance the lift carrying capacity of the plane and so on. So all of those things require a little bit more time and effort and so on.
So what's the time period we're talking about?
We started in 2019.
2019.
And
okay.
We got serious about actually making the full plane by end of 2019, like early 2020. Until then, we were actually making more like a drone to do like a proof of concept. That's when we decided, the drones were actually called out as not being regulated. And so we couldn't go to market with it.
Okay.
And whereas it turned out that, helicopters exist. So if you actually replace the helicopter with an electric plane, at least in the initial period where the skies are too crowded, we could actually use helicopter operating rules in order to be able to operate. So there is nothing that is stopping it from, happening. So by 2020, early 2020 is when we decided let's actually start making the plane. And it's been what, 3-4 years now? Yeah.
Okay.
So we expect to actually make our first prototype by the turn of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the vertical landing and
vertical takeoff? Yeah, we are always doing vertical takeoff landing.
Okay.
Yeah. We have not done conventional takeoff and landing at all.
Understood. So this is more in terms of
It's a more
making
market-driven thing.
yeah, it's more urbanic mobility is what you're focusing on,
yeah.
right? So since we're talking about electric, and this is a question that most people tend to ask about, because there are two schools of thought. Electric is good; it's going to help us. It's the way forward.
Yeah.
But the other piece which is the second school of thought is it actually sustainable? Is it green?
Yeah.
Is it good for the environment? What are your thoughts around that?
It's difficult to exactly put a finger on this or that. We know for a fact that combustion has been hurting us, right, at the scale at which we are operating. So the world is moving away from combustion, that's for sure.
Okay,
right?
which is a good thing.
Right. So then the question is, what's the alternative?
Okay.
And is the alternative worse? It's going to get worse or better than the combustion? So there are. Right now, I don't think we have a lot of studies that are done on the eVTOLs, the electric vertical takeoff and landing, as opposed to, let's say, the ground-based.
Sure.
So the question is, we now begin to sort of compare apples and oranges, right? Because you're actually talking about the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft replacing, or at least partly, the ground mobility.
Right.
Right. So the emissions that we are looking at, we have to actually look at it not as offsetting aviation emissions, but more of ground mobility emissions. Right. So there it becomes a little bit difficult to do this direct comparison. But there's significant amount of studies that have been done between ground electric vehicles and ground IC engine vehicles. There are a lot of well-to-wheel studies and so on that have been done. Every now and then you will actually find one study that is doing saying something opposite to what the other studies are. But I think a very large consensus is that battery-based vehicles are going to be better than the combustion vehicles.
Okay.
And life always goes on with facing newer problems. That's how it is. You
Right.
kind of like stick your neck out, do the next best thing, and then see what problems you face, and then start tackling those problems.
Sure.
And so on. And for example, this morning there's effort by the government that a lot of EV makers are signing up to on recycling batteries. Right? So that's the next problem that they will try to tackle.
Sure.
And so on. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And you can potentially go to newer chemistries, which are a lot more benign and where you don't need to dig the earth for too much of minerals and stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like civilization sort of kind of keeps going in a particular direction. And when Henry Ford actually tried to popularize IC engines, it's possible that somebody called it out.
Yeah.
Because electric cars were there by then.
Okay.
That's a key thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the history is very,
In the
very
1800s?
important. Yeah, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So the electric cars were actually running the thing that actually replaced the hot stone carriages was not the IC engine.
Okay.
It was actually the electric cars.
Okay. That's
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. Right. And Henry Ford was like, if you want to put like an iconic figure behind this, he popularized the IC engine cars against the electric cars. In fact, there is a nice book that actually talks about how electric cars were pitched as feminine. By the way, yeah, there is a gender angle to this.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they were basically saying the IC engine cars are more macho
Okay.
and masculine, and they would sell
Based on
for the
that?
range. Yeah,
Okay.
all these things have happened in about 100 years back, and we are now
wow.
going a full circle.
What's the thing about feminine and masculine?
Oh, there's a book that I've read about how there is a gender angle to technology, right?
Okay.
And then this is one of the chapters.
Okay, interesting. This is very interesting. I've never heard of this one before,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I will look up on electric vehicles in 1800s. That's
Yeah.
something that you passed
Correct,
on.
correct.
So, Satya, based on the electric flying taxis, can I call them taxis?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the
That's
flying taxis.
that's a prominent use case. Yeah.
Okay, that's a prominent use case, right? So I was thinking about how is it going to be from, like if I would want to use it, right? From a customer angle in terms of safety. Because whenever you do go towards the mountainous regions, you have some of these, you can take some of these rides on flying taxis.
Yep.
Yeah, but the safety has always been a prominent issue that has been discussed. So
With helicopters.
with the helicopters,
Correct.
right? So how are you dealing with that?
Oh,
on
that's
Eplane?
okay. So the quick answer that I could give, it may not be very convincing,
Okay.
is that the authorities will take care of this. Right? So
Okay.
the idea here is, I mean, but that's not a convincing answer. I'll tell you why that
Sure.
too, right? But prior to that, what are the authorities actually taking care of, right? So we are supposed to certify the plane to have a 1 in a billion chances of failure. That's the kind of ability that we have to demonstrate in order to be able to certify the plane for flying flying over congested spaces. That is actually the new regulation that's come on this. So this machine is actually going to be super safe when compared to anything else that you have seen. That is what they expect and they try to insist on, right?
Right.
But how is the safety coming about, or why is it not a convincing answer? Helicopters are also certified, right? But helicopters have a fairly checkered record on safety, right? So they've not thought through like flying over congested spaces, improving upon the safety requirements for it and all those things for helicopters yet. And helicopters, that's the reason why it's kind of like a chicken and egg problem. So you find that helicopters are actually flying few and far between, not so frequently over our heads. And for the same reason, the certification agencies are like, okay, fine, you're actually doing this once in a while. We don't need to be very strict about it. Right? I mean, they have standards. The standards are not as tight as what they are actually going to be applying for these air taxis. That is, so once they start applying these standards, you will find that it becomes more convincing. That is the idea, right? But it has not yet happened yet, or it's actually happening right now as we speak. So we have not really seen these things meet those standards and operate and live up to those standards for us to prove and so on. So that's where the convincing part is. So if you now look at the tech stack that will meet up to this is not a single rotor system anymore. It's not a helicopter, right? So it's actually a multi-rotor system. So it actually takes off like a multi-copter drone typically.
Okay.
So you have multiple rotors that have a certain redundancy built into them. If one of them fails, there'll be others that are taking over.
Sure.
So you're not really having to fall in a thud while you're taking off or landing. But you go forward, you actually have a fixed wing that will operate like a plane. And it has the capability to glide to safety if something happened to the vertical rotors and you cannot land vertically. But you just have to find like a short strip of land where you can actually go and land somewhere to safety.
Sure.
So that's the second layer of safety that's built in.
Okay.
The point being, at least in the way we designed this, the vertical rotors obviously will have to balance the entire weight of the aircraft because you have to take off, overcoming the weight of the aircraft while you take off. The fixed wing is also designed to make sure that the entire weight of the aircraft can be lifted by the wings.
Okay.
So you have like two ways by which you will be held up there.
Sure.
Right, independently, and in a combination as well, and so on. Right, so the combination is actually to make sure that you're not guzzling too much power, because you're getting help from both in some ways. But let's say both of them fail for some reason. Right? Let's say you got like a bad hit on the wing, and then the wing got chipped off, and then the couple of vertical rotor blades also actually went away, and so on, and you are about to fall like a brick.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
You do remember I'm on it, right?
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Right. So we'll still have parachutes and inflatables.
Okay.
That'll make sure that you're coming in like a balloon.
Okay.
And having a soft landing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
and on top of this, the entire cabin in which that you sit is actually designed to take a crash and be intact.
wow.
Okay. Yeah, that's how the certification can happen.
Sure.
Right. So we just meet those standards.
Sure.
Yeah.
Does climate play like the role of an anti-hero when you're looking at safety?
You mean the weather?
The weather?
The weather, yeah. I mean, so we have to actually factor that in as well. So that's again where a combination of the vertical rotors and the fixed wing would come in. So what
Sure.
we are developing at Eplane is the most compact electric aircraft in the world. Compact aircraft in the world, period. I mean, let's not even bother about electric or
Okay. Otherwise,
no adjectives.
Okay.
Right? right? So the larger the wing is, it is actually more susceptible to gust. It gets tossed around. What is gust? You have like a sudden rush of air in one place versus the opposite the other way, and so on. So if the wingspan is large, then you actually get tossed around a lot more. Whereas if you're very compact, your so-called gust cross section is smaller.
Right.
So you're less susceptible to this, first of all. So what we do is we also actually have the vertical rotors chip in on the control as a second layer when you have additional level of gusts. So we expect that we can have a much better gust profile that can withstand higher levels of winds when compared to most other aircraft. That's our target. We haven't put a number to it yet, but we will have to actually push the boundaries to find out like what's the worst winds that we can actually withstand. So typically, if you look at like a storm, the winds are like around typically 120 kilometer per hour, right? But we believe that anywhere like about 60 kilometer per hour is something that we can easily withstand when compared to we may not be able to actually take off in a storm, and I don't think you will want to get into a plane
when there is a storm. Yeah, definitely not.
But when you have like rains and wind, like the normal weather, normal bad weather that is, right? It should not be a problem.
What about visibility issues?
We have radars. So in fact, the entire plane is supposed to be autonomous.
Okay.
So it has a bunch of cameras, lidars, and radars, and there is a sensor fusion that's done on board to map out the entire situational awareness around the plane. That figures out like where are the obstacles around, which way you can. For example, let's say there is a sudden obstacle that comes up, and then you have to duck or jump up and so on. You want to also make sure that there are no other planes in those elevations around and all that stuff that's coming in. So you are actually having radars that can cut through a fog, for example, right? And then so on. So
sure. So since you said this is completely autonomous, right?
It's not. I mean, we make it completely autonomous, but certification rules require a pilot to be sitting in there.
And what kind of flying hours does the pilot need to have?
Right now, they are looking at the same as
flying a plane?
Yeah, the normal plane, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So this is a CP, a commercial pilot who will...
Correct. So I think a lesser number of... So what we might actually bargain for over time is a lesser number of flying hours that may be required for this.
Okay.
But we have not got to that stage yet.
Understood. So where will this get first tested out? I'm assuming that it's in a phase where it's almost ready and...
Yeah, so it's going to be tested in an airfield. We don't need the airstrip as such because we are vertical takeoff. We don't need like a landing strip. But effectively, the landing strip comes along with like a large open area. Yeah, that's how it is. So we'll just keep on going in like very elongated circles to test it out.
Understood. So it'll be easier for you to even figure out what are the chances of failure, right?
Exactly. If it falls down, it's going to fall down on the airstrip. So there is nothing over there.
Sure. Yeah. So we were discussing
this. We're expecting it will not be a busy airstrip.
Yeah. I'm sure the militaries don't have a busy
There are a bunch of such airstrips around.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So if I were to ask you, moving along from how the Eplane has been built, you've actually put your hands into or your fingers into multiple other interesting stuff as well. One which I already told you that the Galaxeye is something that was beyond my understanding or understanding capability. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with Galaxeye? What does it focus on?
So for us to understand what Galaxeye does, we have actually asked the question, what do current Earth observation satellites do?
Okay.
So Earth observation satellites, as the name suggests, observe the Earth, right? So they observe the Earth with cameras. And these cameras typically, most of them actually operate in the visible spectrum, the one that we are comfortable using with our eyes.
Sure.
And the visible spectrum is very narrow. And it doesn't cut through cloud cover. And if you don't have the sun's illumination during the daytime, which is like in the nighttime, it's dark, you will not be able to get to see anything.
Okay.
So effectively, an Earth observation satellite that's operating in the visible spectrum is actually effective only about 25% of the time. It's not effective during the nights, so 50% is gone. And during the daytime, if there was a cloud cover, sorry, this is what it is.
Wow. So you need to actually deploy many of them. If you
No, I
need
mean, even if you deployed many of them, this
Okay.
this is the problem, right?
Okay.
In night time, it won't work, and in the daytime, if there is a cloud cover, it won't work,
Okay.
right? So no matter how many you have up in the sky. So in order to alleviate this problem, there are Earth observation satellites that actually work in the IR range, which can
Okay.
cut through cloud cover. It can also get IR signature during night times.
And what does IR stand for? Sorry.
In infrared.
Infrared. Okay.
Right, so it actually is mapping in a spectrum that's outside the visible spectrum.
Okay.
Right, so visible spectrum is the WebGR,
Sure.
violet to red.
Right.
Right, so IR is infrared, that is like even past red. That means you actually get like a monochrome image that's just red and black. Like for example, body heat will have a signature. A car will actually have some IR signature. So a bunch of these will actually have different IR signatures. You can map that. The problem is that those pictures will actually look very blurred because we are not used to seeing how IR images look like. We are used to seeing color.
Correct.
We are not used to seeing heat.
Right.
So it kind of gives you like a heat map.
Okay.
And we will have to figure out how to read that. So that's the other problem. Okay. So what Galaxeye does is something really fascinating, and we are the only ones in the world who do this. That's the other thing, right? So we figured out
in the world, you
in
say.
the world, yeah. I mean, okay, a lot of things that I talk about will always be in the world.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
So that's the other pet theme, right? We have, I think, come to a point in India where we are not lagging behind anybody. We are actually ahead of them.
Sure.
Right. And there are a bunch of things like that, and this is also one of those. So let's get used to the fact that we do something the best in the world.
Sure.
Right. That's
sure.
right. That's the subtext. So here, we are actually having multiple sensors. We have a IR sensor. We have a visible spectrum sensor. Sensors are essentially, camera is actually more, colloquial way of saying a more sophisticated term is sensor. Right. So we have both of them. Both of them are actually made to look at the same place at the same time. So we have to synchronize them. We have to co-register the pixels. So pixel for pixel, we have to actually match the two images that are taken. So there are opportunities for you to map a place on Earth when there is light, there is no cloud cover, where the visible spectrum camera works, the 25% of the time that I mentioned, but the IR camera also works along with it, right? So you get this heat map as well as the clear image, and we now use these to do a lot of deep learning, which is essentially artificial intelligence, to figure out the next time I have a cloud cover or night time and I'm actually looking at the same place and I get only the heat map, how do I actually render it in a way that I look at it more like a visible camera image.
Very interesting.
Okay, so fundamentally we actually run out of excuse for not imaging the Earth around the clock. That's what we do.
Wow. So typically all the images which were not readable become readable thanks to Galaxeye.
Yeah.
And where is it being used right now?
We are actually putting together a satellite that we will have to launch.
Sure.
Right, and that's going to take a little while.
Okay.
For us to maybe sometime next year we should actually find a opportunity to launch a satellite.
Very interesting.
But before that, what we're doing is to actually configure a smaller payload. So this entire thing with the satellite will probably be of the order of like about 50 kgs of weight or something. But something that just looking at how the sensor alone is packed at a smaller level, we are able to do this within about 3.5 kgs or something. And this can actually go on top of drones.
Okay.
We don't need to actually push them into satellites, and which essentially means that we get a lot of night vision capability that is being learned to look at as if it's daytime images.
Interesting. And how will the drones get? I'm a little confused. How will the drones get to see all of this? Because
you just use this as a payload under a drone.
Payload. Okay.
So the drone can actually do this at a much lower altitude.
Right.
And the lower altitude also means that you can get much better resolution.
Visibility as well. Yeah.
And resolution, because you are actually mapping things much closer to the Earth when compared to what a satellite does.
Sure.
So right now we are actually positioning a drone-based sensor.
Okay.
I think we are again the first ones in the world to do that.
Interesting.
And so on. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So moving away from Galaxeye, because we have to cover all the others as well, right? I was super curious about Aerostrovilos, right? I looked it up. technically means aeronautical whirlwind.
That's a Greek name.
That's a
Yeah,
Greek name,
yeah.
yeah.
But that's a literal translation. But
Okay. How did you come up with this name? First of all, it's a
my
little...
co-founders did.
Okay, okay.
I don't bother about these things. Right. So
Sure.
I'm bothered more about the technology
Right.
rather than the name of the company.
So I was looking it up, and I
Yeah.
figured that this is more to do with helping the environment, right? Reduce in terms of the kind of pollution that gets generated by trucks, and how we
Absolutely.
can.
So
Yeah.
the origin of this is actually from meeting two ends. One is at the combustion center that I had established by then, we were tackling what's called the grand challenge in gas turbines. And gas turbines are the engines that are used in aircraft, but they're also used on the ground for power generation.
Right.
And they have a problem that they have a lot of emissions, and in order to bring down the emissions, you change your combustion pattern. That leads to another problem called combustion instability that can wreck the engine if it just goes awry sometime.
Oh Lord. Okay.
And yeah, and then they will have to and in the case of aircraft gas turbines, the emission norms are actually not as stringent as the land-based power generation gas turbines. So they don't actually get to the point where the combustion goes unstable and wrecks the engine. But in the case of land-based gas turbines, the emission norms are actually so strict that when they try to comply with it with a particular combustion mode, it gets into this problem of combustion instability, and it wrecks the engine. You have a downtime trying to repair the entire engine, and that can actually lead to power losses on the grid and billions of dollars of downtime.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's right. So this is actually it's been a problem. For example, Alstom, if I know right, they were almost going bust with this problem. Right? And then GE bought over Alstom and all that stuff. So this is like a big thing. So at the combustion center, we were trying to tackle this problem. And we said, let's actually come up with a different combustion mode than what people are doing that will eliminate this problem completely. And also make sure that we get the pollutant emission norms to be met much more stringently than what they even exist today.
Sure.
Right? So it's actually a grand challenge that we were doing. We tried to then push this into the gas turbine. So the second thing that happened was we had a couple of founders who said that we wanted to make gas turbines. And so we said, let's actually push this technology into that.
Okay.
So this combustion mode allows us to be extremely fuel flexible, which means that we can take any existing fuel that is there as well as any future fuels all the way to hydrogen. So it's sort of like a transition engine, if you will, that can last long as and when new fuels are being brought in for greener and greener combustion, if you will.
Okay.
Right? And so then what do you do with this engine? Right? So we believe that we have an answer to electrifying trucks, for example, right? So right today, for example, if you now look at electrification of trucks, it's a hard problem to solve because you need like huge amount of battery with the existing batteries that we have. So if those batteries can be removed and we actually put this engine, we save a lot of weight that can otherwise be taken for the payload. And we have a very clean combustion. We can use any fuel, which could actually be greener in the future, and so on. So that's how we are tackling this problem.
Right. So, but when you look at what you guys do with gas turbine, wouldn't this, it goes back to the piece of, isn't it going to make it heavier?
No. So there are two things that we're comparing against. One is a full battery electric truck. That's a super heavy situation because for something like about a 35-ton grade truck where the payload is 35 tons, if you have to actually haul that, you will need like about 7 tons of battery itself.
Okay.
Whereas a current diesel engine that's trying to do this same job is weighing only around about 700 kgs. That's what it is. What we want to do is to actually replace that diesel engine with a very slim battery pack and the electric powertrain and put this engine on top, all of that for about 550 kgs. So,
550 kgs?
Yeah, so we are actually the lightest among all things that you can think of.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does the body of the vehicle also change with...
We have configured it in such a way that it has the same form factor as this IC engine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so we
Interesting.
can fit everything within that.
So when do we see some of these trucks on the road?
Hopefully next year.
Next
we
year?
expect by end of next year. So by middle of next year, we can actually get. So there are three parts to it: the gas turbine. But keep in mind that this is actually more like a power generation device. We are actually generating onboard power,
Right.
and we are constantly charging a slim battery pack that acts as part of the front end, which is the electric power train. So you have that slim battery pack, and then you have the motors and the drives and all that stuff.
Right.
And then you have this engine at the back. So, and then this engine has to actually generate power. So there is the engine, then there is a generator, and then the vehicle. Right. So I think we should actually get to the point of having the generator done. So we should get the engine by first quarter of next year.
Okay.
And the generator by middle of the next year, and the vehicle by end of next year.
And this is is there like a, alliance with somebody who's already building trucks?
We have got a generous donation from Ashok Leland with
nice.
with an electric bus.
All right.
So they have the entire. So we have the powertrain ready.
Okay.
Right. So the front end powertrain is there. So we have to just remove the battery pack and put this engine. So that's what we are planning to demonstrate it on.
Interesting. Interesting. We look forward to having that
Yeah.
on the road as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, coming to the end of the session, and I had this question that's been, on my mind since we started. And I asked you this earlier, but what do you think is deep tech for India in the future? That is one. And, to follow it up, I also wanted to check with you if there are more founders who have interest in deep tech, what will be the advice you'd like to give them?
Good. So we are at actually a cusp of a change in my mind for the following reasons. There are literally hundreds of thousands of engineers that are actually graduating from our colleges. And most of them are landing up in places where they don't get to apply what they have studied. And most of them are actually also okay with it.
Correct.
That's how it is.
Right.
Let's not be judgmental about all of that.
Absolutely.
But there are a few people who feel bad.
Sure.
Okay, and then they say, hey, I actually went to engineering, I wanted to do something, I want to make products and all that stuff. So typically so far they have been looking at what's called as core jobs. The core jobs have been in large companies where there isn't much of a R&D that happens within India. And that's been a problem for these people, saying that we don't really have any much of originality in what we're doing and so on. That's where the deep tech startups are coming into picture.
Okay.
So when you now are having deep tech startups developing products, this is actually not so common until about 5 years back, 10 years max in India, right? I mean, to put it very bluntly, at the risk of overgeneralization, an Indian product is an oxymoron.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, and that's what we're trying to break free. And then there are a bunch of engineers who are now beginning to say, yes, we can actually take a stab at it. Now, what allows them to do that is probably some amount of venture capital that's willing to take a stab at these things alongside, giving some money. And we need that tribe to grow. If both of these actually grow hand in hand, I think before the end of this decade, so they keep calling techade and all that stuff, right? So I believe a lot of tech, we can have the software stack, the AI and all those things, but that just can't be it, right? At the end of the day, you can't eat a virtual brinjal for your breakfast, your meal, right? So you need to have the real
Correct.
stuff. So it's all about hardware, finally.
Yeah.
And we come from the mobility space, the energy space, and all those things, which are like really, really deep hardware. It's not a silicon wafer chips based thing. I mean, which is actually a stack that is riding on top of the wheels and propellers and all that.
Right.
No doubt about it. But we need all those the other things, the batteries, everything that we're talking about. So there is a lot of innovation that's waiting to happen. There are people who are actually raring to go. We just need more and more venture capital to support this.
So this is more advice to the venture capitalists rather than the founder.
Oh yeah, please open up your eyes and see the kids around, and please support them.
We kind of discussed this, right? The venture capitalists probably also don't know how long this is going to take, right? So do you think you should be kind of knocking on P's rather than the venture capitalists?
I mean, see, a techie is essentially focused on the problem to solve,
Absolutely.
right? So whichever way the money comes, we are willing to take. You can call them whatever initials you want, I mean,
Sure.
or the alphabet soup you want.
Sure.
Give us money.
Right.
Right, but so typically this is called the patient capital, right? So and then question,
Correct.
I mean, so people understand that,
Correct.
right? So we need people who can morph themselves to offer patient capital. So you can call, I mean, you can call them PCs if you want.
Right.
Come up with new
abbreviations.
Yeah, new abbreviations. That's fine. I don't have a problem.
Interesting.
You got to figure out how to fund this.
Interesting. Any last few words you'd like to pass on to people watching the show who probably got attracted to your startup and want to
Yeah.
join you, or just general
Yeah.
inspirational words?
I'm actually very big on the India story that's going around. It's nothing political at all. I believe that it's the Indians who actually form India, and we are all in here to make this place a better place.
Sure.
And we don't have the, so for example, if you think about an American situation, right? So when they look at Indians, working over there, there is a general stereotype that they are actually very good at software. Sitting within India, unfortunately for us, we don't have to actually slot ourselves into those kinds of stereotypes. We want to do everything.
Correct.
Right? And that openness is there, particularly with the young people, and they want to experiment with a bunch of different things. All of that stuff is going to add up to making this particular decade a much greater place than what we can imagine today.
Sure.
We are still early in the decade.
Wow. That's quite inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Satya, for doing this with us. I really enjoyed learning a lot of concepts. I'll still, probably after this show, I'll still write to you or keep in touch with you to know a little more on what
Sure.
you guys are doing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if we do this show a year or two later,
It's
I'll
going to be...
probably come up with different technologies to
You'll
talk
probably
about.
land in an ePlane here. Yeah.
Hopefully, yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Really
you.
enjoyed
Thanks
this.
a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.